Doctor Strange isn't just a guy in a cool cape in an ancient library. He's the Sorcerer Supreme, and his magic can shatter realities. But there's more to his power than the typical spells you see on screen or in the comics. Behind that mystical exterior is a vast and terrifying arsenal of insane spells. Some so powerful and bizarre, they could leave even the most seasoned heroes trembling. So let's take a deep dive into some of the wildest, most mind-bending magic that Doctor Strange has ever wielded. Among Strange's go-to containment spells, the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak are some of the most iconic. These mystical energy bands, glowing with red light, are summoned from Cyttorak, a powerful deity who also gave the Juggernaut his unstoppable strength. When conjured, the bands bind the target in unbreakable magic restraints. They've held demons, sorcerers, and even the Hulk for a while. In fact, these things are so strong they could possibly even hold in your dad's unresolved emotions. You know, ones that make him look like he's about to cry during a fireworks show because America. The fact that Strange uses the spell as his first line of defense against cosmic level threats tells you everything you need to know about his power. It's defensive, non-lethal, and versatile, which makes it a favorite in both mystical duels and bigger superhero crossovers. In the MCU, in Avengers Infinity War, Doctor Strange uses a spell against Thanos in a visually striking moment, encasing him in crimson bands to try to hold him in place. While it ultimately doesn't stop the Mad Titan, the scene marks one of the most direct and faithful adaptations of a classic Strange spell from comics into the MCU. The Winds of Watoomb are a classic force of magical manipulation, often used to deflect or redirect energy attacks or even open up portals. They're invoked with the dramatic sweep of Strange's hands and usually shown as a powerful gust of wind or spiraling vortexes. While not an offensive spell per se, Winds of Watoomb demonstrate Strange's ability to control the battlefield, turning overwhelming forces against themselves. Images of Icon create magical duplicates or illusions, perfect for distraction, stealth, or tricking enemies. Unlike simple holograms, these copies can sometimes mimic Strange's power signature, confusing even seasoned mystics. Imagine fighting Doctor Strange, and suddenly there's 30 of him, all chanting backwards Latin and crying blood. One of them offers you a Werther's original. You don't know which one to punch, you just start crying. The spell is rooted in manipulation of perception and expectation, a recurring theme in Strange's battles. It reflects his cleverness as much as his power. Images of Icon is never named on screen, but the effect is unmistakable when Strange creates dozens of illusionary duplicates of himself during his battle with Thanos in Infinity War. This comic book spell is used to deceive or overwhelm opponents through visual trickery, and the MCU version captures that perfectly. Though the name isn't mentioned, the visual execution and function make it clear it's a nod to the spell. This is one of Strange's go-to defensive spells. When a physical or magical attack is about to land, the Shield of Saraphim manifests as a glowing barrier of light, usually circular, but its size can vary depending on the power behind it. It's named after the Saraphim, angelic beings invoked in multiple mystic rites. It visually reinforces the idea that Strange isn't just a wizard throwing out random blasts. He's constantly assessing magical threats, choosing the right tool to survive. The Shield of the Seraphim also goes unnamed, but is likely the basis for the glowing golden circular shield Strange frequently conjures throughout his MCU appearances. These magical constructs are used to block attacks, absorb impacts, and create barriers. First seen in his initial training, they become a regular part of his magical combat style. While the shields are never formally identified as the Shield of Seraphim, the defensive role they play lines up with the spell's function in the comics. Flames of Faline. This is one of Strange's most dangerous and aggressive spells. The Flames of Faline are raw magical fire, tied to extra-dimensional entities made of living magic, like Dormammu himself. When Strange invokes these flames, they burn through magical wards, consume ethereal entities, and are nearly impossible to extinguish. Danger is part of the appeal. It shows Strange's willingness to tap into primal, volatile forces absolutely necessary. Like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline fumes. The match is alive and whispering your childhood secrets back at you. Don't cast this unless you're ready to watch something melt from the soul outward. Eye of Agamoto. Though often seen as an artifact, the Eye also channels one of Strange's most versatile spells. It reveals truth, dispels illusions, probes minds, and can even replay past events. It's basically a cosmic version of reading your girlfriend's group chat. You weren't ready for that truth, Steven. The Eye is powered by the wisdom of Agamoto, the first sorcerer supreme. It isn't just a lie detector, it's a mystical lens that lets Strange pierce the veil between worlds and minds. It's a tool of enlightenment, not just combat. The Eye of Agamoto is one of the most iconic magical artifacts in Doctor Strange's arsenal, both in the comics and the MCU. In the films, it houses the Time Stone, and grants Strange the ability to manipulate time, rewinding events, creating time loops, and even trapping Dormammu in an endless cycle until he agrees to leave Earth. While its comic book counterpart is more about revealing truth, dispelling illusions, and detecting magical threats, the MCU version focuses heavily on its time-based functionality, making it a crucial object in the Infinity Saga. The Vapors of Valtorr are a perfect example of how Doctor Strange doesn't just fight with power, he fights with misdirection, atmosphere, and physical warfare, and psychological warfare. These thick magical mists are summoned from the entity Valtorr, one of the many eldritch beings Strange draws upon. When the vapors swirl into being, they usually appear as clouds of green, purple, or crimson smoke, often rolling in unnaturally fast and obscuring everything in their path. At their simplest, the vapors are a concealment tool. They can hide Strange's movements, allowing him to vanish from sight or reposition himself during battle. They can also disorient enemies, cloud their vision, dull their senses, or in some versions cause paralysis or hallucinations. In other words, Strange doesn't just use the spell to disappear, he uses it to mess with your head. The vapors aren't about brute force, they're a way to shift the battlefield to Strange's advantage. He might drop them to buy time, mask an illusion, or set up a more devastating spell. And because the vapors don't always have a predictable effect, they add an element of chaos. One moment you're breathing normally, the next you're stumbling through a dreamlike haze while Strange chants something ominous in the background. It's not the flashiest magic in his toolkit. The Vapors of Valtorr show how Strange turns the environment itself into a weapon. And sometimes that's more dangerous than any fireball. Astral Projection isn't just a single spell, it's more like a fundamental discipline of the mystic arts. By mastering it, Doctor Strange can separate his soul or astral form from his physical body. In this state, he becomes an intangible spirit, untethered by gravity, walls, or time zones. It's a subtle power, but it opens up entire dimensions of storytelling. He can fly through locked doors, spy on enemies, travel across the world in seconds, or even venture into entirely different planes of existence. Turn Strange into a ghost with purpose. But Astral Projection isn't without its risks. While Strange's physical body remains unconscious and vulnerable, his soul can still be attacked by other magical entities. Just because he's invisible doesn't mean he's invincible. If his astral form is destroyed or trapped, there may be no return. In the MCU, this ability is introduced during his early training in Doctor Strange in 2016, when the Ancient One knocks his soul clean out of his body with a single touch, a moment that becomes his first glimpse into the true weirdness of magic. From there, it becomes a recurring trick. In Multiverse of Madness, he takes it even further, projecting his consciousness into the corpse of an alternate version of himself to keep fighting, a moment that's grotesque, surreal, and very on brand. Visually, the MCU gets this power right. Strange's soul emerges as a glowing, translucent outline, often leaving behind a ripple of energy. One of the most recognizable magical effects in both the films and the comics, and it captures the essence of what makes Strange so different. His power isn't always about domination, it's about perception, awareness, and the ability to be in places no one else can reach. The Spell of Forgetfulness, used sparingly but with seismic consequences. The Spell of Forgetfulness is exactly what it sounds like, a magical wipe of the mental hard drive. Whether aimed at one person or broadcast across an entire population, the spell erases or alters memories, sometimes selectively, sometimes entirely. And that makes it one of the most ethically loaded tools in Doctor Strange's arsenal. A spell that erases memories? Finally, something strong enough to delete that time you tried to flirt by quoting Rick and Morty. In all seriousness, this isn't just a neat party trick, it's narrative dynamite. When Strange casts it, it's never about the magic, it's about trust, identity, and the boundaries of consent. If someone's memory defines who they are, what does it mean to strip that away? Memory magic like this tends to walk the line between convenience and corruption. It's often portrayed as a desperate measure, used when the danger of someone knowing something outweighs the costs of them forgetting it. In the MCU, we see a version of this in Spider-Man No Way Home, when Strange casts a spell to make the world forget Peter Parker's identity. What starts as a favor spirals into chaos, illustrating exactly why memory manipulation is such a minefield. Even small changes to memory can unravel relationships, history, or entire timelines. And unlike flashy energy blasts or portal spells, the consequences of this magic don't leave scorch marks, they leave emotional wreckage. When the spell wears off or fails, the fallout can be brutal. It's not just about what people forget, it's about what they remember wrong, or never knew they lost. So, while the spell of forgetfulness doesn't create visual fireworks, it's one of the most narratively dangerous moves in Strange's kit. It's less about power, more about control, over others, over truth, and over how reality itself is remembered. Chains of Kraken. These aren't just chains, they're containment spells, forged into physical form. Summoned when Doctor Strange needs to lock down something too dangerous to leave room for error. The Chains of Kraken don't just hold, they respond. The moment they wrap around a target, they begin analyzing magical output, adapting to power levels, and tightening like Eldritch Vice grips. They're less famous than the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak, but in many ways they're even more terrifying because they're not just a wall of force. They're a judgment. These chains just don't hold magical beings, they understand them. They twist, slither, and adjust, binding spirits, demons, even chaotic dimensional forces. Don't throw the Chains of Kraken at street level threats. You unleash them when you need to immobilize something that thinks reality is optional. Visually, they often appear as glowing spectral links, sometimes golden, sometimes blue, sometimes shadowy, snaking through the air with eerie precision. And when they latch on, they don't just restrict movement, they disrupt spells, weaken wards, and shut down power sources. It's less like rope and more like magical straitjacket designed by sadistic AI. They're like bondage gear from a haunted Hot Topic. Every link on the chain moans softly when you touch it, but not in even a fun way, or in a this chain has tasted souls kind of way. There's something deeply cursed about them, as if every time Strange uses them, he's temporarily borrowing power from something ancient and unspeakable, which, let's be honest, is kind of his whole thing. The fangs of Ferala aren't metaphorical. The spell summons an actual gaping maw, complete with serrated, spectral teeth that erupt from thin air to bite down on enemies. We're talking about a spell that doesn't just restrain a threat, it devours it. And the best part? It doesn't need precision. You point, you yell, and Ferala's chomping nightmare mouth does the rest. Ferala himself hails from the Savage Principalities, a battleground dimension where power is survival and everything screams. So when Doctor Strange invokes the fangs, he's channeling a being who understands exactly what it means to tear something apart in the middle of a war zone. This spell isn't elegant, but it's effective. It buys Strange precious seconds he can use to regroup, launch a counterattack, or just not die. Visually, it's one of the most metal things Strange can do. Picture a glowing rip in space that opens like a demonic Venus flytrap, snapping shut around demons, spirits, or unlucky sorcerers. There's usually a shriek involved, some disturbing crunches, and a lot of regret, mostly from whoever's inside the mount. It's not just a tool, it's a threat. A warning. The fangs of Ferala say, I could have used a barrier, but I chose teeth. Now we're getting weird. Well, more weird. Moons of Monapore isn't just a spell, it's a declaration that reality is about to get real uncomfortable. You see, Monapore isn't a cozy alternate plane or a pocket dimension with polite physics. It's a distant, chaotic realm governed by three eldritch goddesses who deal in balance, judgment, and the kind of magic that makes your organs hum wrong. And when Strange calls on their moons, things go sideways fast. The spell is as unpredictable as it is powerful. Sometimes the moons amplify his spells tenfold, like mystical steroid injections from across the cosmos. Other times, they banish enemies to nightmare pocket realms that don't follow the usual rules of time, space, or mercy. You might find yourself weightless in a dimension where gravity works like mood swings, orbiting a deity that looks like a melting candle made of skin. And you don't come back from something like that. What the Moons of Monapore do depends on how Strange invokes them and how the goddess feels about him at that day. It's not like pressing a button. It's more like calling your terrifying cosmic aunties and asking for help, hoping they're not mad about the last time you borrowed reality and forgot to put it back. The Moons of Monapore are rarely used, but when they are, it means Strange has decided this fight isn't just dangerous, it's existential. If you see him reaching for the spell, pray you're not in the blast radius because this isn't just magic, it's a cosmic eviction notice with no return address. The Bolts of Balfac, yes, Bolts of Balfac, what they're called, are one of Doctor Strange's most direct and aggressive offensive spells. Named after Balfac, an entity tied to the Dark Dimension, these bolts are streams of concentrated mystical energy used to attack, stun, or disrupt enemies. They're not subtle. When Strange casts them, it's because he needs to hit something hard, fast, and with magical force. These bolts can break through magical barriers, disrupt enemy spells, and pin down or scatter multiple attackers. Strange can also vary their intensity, using them to disorient or knock enemies back without going fully lethal. This makes them tactically useful in close-quarter magical duels, especially when he needs to keep his opponents off balance. In the MCU, while the name Bolts of Balfac isn't spoken aloud, the spell appears visually. In Avengers Infinity War, Strange uses these rapid-fire blasts against Thanos during their battle on Titan, launching multiple projectiles in quick succession to pressure and disorient the Mad Titan. Similar spell shows up again in Multiverse of Madness, where Strange unleashes a barrage of arcane energy during his battles with both Wanda and Sinister Strange, consistent with how the bolts function in the comics. Fast, precise, and forceful. The Bolts of Balfac aren't as iconic as the Crimson Bands or the Eye of Agamoto, but they're a staple in Strange's arsenal. Think of them like his go-to spell gun. They're efficient, reliable, and best of all, they remind everyone watching that even the Sorcerer Supreme doesn't mind getting a little aggressive when the moment calls for it. So, the next time you see Doctor Strange using a spell in the MCU or comics, just remember, it's never as simple as a dispel evil incantation, and these are just a few of the spells in his arsenal. Doctor Strange is more than just the Sorcerer Supreme. He's a multiversal powerhouse. So, what's your favorite Strange spell? Let me know down in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed this, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and keep the magic flowing. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.